Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're not in a studio. We're going somewhere else. We are transporting ourselves back to a very specific, very gritty moment.
It is Good Friday, April 1963.
The air is thick, humid, hostile, and the setting is a solitary confinement cell in Birmingham, Alabama.
A place designed for one thing, really, to break a person. That's the whole point of solitary.
Exactly. And inside this cell is Martin Luther King Jr. He's been arrested for, what was it, parading without a permit?
Right, the conditions are just awful.
Absolutely wretched. He has no mattress, no linen. He's just surrounded by darkness. And this is critical for him, he has no writing pad, no desk.
Nothing. It's a complete void of resources. You've got one of the most brilliant minds of the century sitting in silence, effectively gagged.
And yet, from that void comes one of the most significant texts in American history.
Yep.
That's the part that always it blows my mind.
Yeah.
Sources detail this incredible, almost like a MacGyver moment of theology. He starts writing the letter from Birmingham Jail on the actual margins of a newspaper.
And it's the very newspaper that had the criticism he was responding to.
No way.
Oh, yeah. He's writing over the ads in little white spaces between the columns.
That's amazing. And when he runs out of room there, he moves to, what, scraps of paper? I think I read he even used toilet paper at one point.
He did, before his lawyers finally managed to smuggle in a legal pad. But you could just feel the determination there, right? This isn't some academic exercise with a cup of tea.
Not at all. He's writing furiously in the dark.
And that urgency is so key to understanding the text. This is battlefield correspondence. And to really get it, you have to know the catalyst. Why was he even writing?
Right. He's responding to a specific thing called the Call to Unity. It was published by 8 local white clergymen.
Bishops, ministers, even a rabbi.
And this is where the context is so important. These 8 guys, they weren't, the villains of the story. They weren't the KKK.
No, not at all. They weren't Bull Connor with the fire hoses. They were the moderates.
The quote-unquote good guys.
You could say that. They were religious leaders who probably wanted the same thing as King, an end to segregation. But they just hated his methods.
They called his actions unwise and untimely.
And they labeled him an outsider, an outside agitator coming in to cause trouble.
And that accusation, the outsider thing, that seems to have really gotten under his skin.
It stung, because it was an attempt to delegitimize the entire movement.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this response.
Yeah.
We want to see how King turns a jail cell defense into this masterclass on civil disobedience. And specifically, I really want to drill down into how he uses the Bible figures like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prove that breaking the law can sometimes be the most religious thing you can do.
It's a fascinating move. He takes the clergyman's own holy book and basically uses it to dismantle their entire argument for law and order.
Okay, let's get into it. The first thing he has to tackle is this outside agitator label.
Right.
The clergy are basically saying, go back to Atlanta. This is a Birmingham problem. You don't belong here.
It's a territorial argument. They're drawing a circle around the city and saying you're not authorized to be here. King knows he can't just win that on a political level.
So he has to elevate the conversation.
Immediately. He pivots straight to the biblical. He compares himself to the Apostle Paul.
That's a pretty bold comparison. I'm like the guy who wrote half the New Testament.
It is bold, but it's brilliant. He says that just as Paul left his hometown to carry the gospel to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, he is also compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond his own hometown.
So he's reframing it, not as a political intrusion, but as a
missionary journey. Exactly. He's not a troublemaker. He's a missionary.
And he's talking to bishops and rabbis, so he's speaking their language.
That's the key. He's saying the mandate to spread truth doesn't just stop at a state line.
And this leads to that line that you see on posters everywhere. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
It's so iconic. But it's also a direct philosophical rebuttal to the whole idea of an outsider. He introduces this concept of the network of mutuality.
We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny.
I love that phrasing. But what does it actually mean?
It means we are structurally interconnected. He's saying you can't sit comfortably in Atlanta and think what's happening in Birmingham won't affect you.
Because if the foundation of justice cracks in one place,
it shakes everywhere. He's saying, in his view, you can't be an outsider in your own country. We're all tied together in this web. He just dissolves the very boundary they're trying to draw.
Okay, that brings us to the core tension of the whole letter, and really the whole movement at that time. These clergymen were anxious. They saw people breaking laws, sit-ins, parades without permits, and as religious leaders who valued order, they were freaking out.
It's a fair question. From their perspective, how can you, a minister, justify breaking the law? Aren't you just asking for anarchy?
Right. He can't just say, well, I break laws I don't like. No, that's chaos. So he performs this brilliant theological pivot. He says there isn't just one level of law. There's man's law, and then there's a higher moral law.
And to prove it, he goes way back to the Old Testament, the book of Daniel.
Which brings us to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
The original civil disobedience.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
So walk us through how he uses this story. I mean, it's not just a nice Sunday school lesson for him. He's using it as a legal precedent.
He is. So look at the story. You have a legitimate government, King Nebuchadnezzar, and you have a clear written law. Everyone must bow down to this golden image.
No ambiguity. That's law of the land.
And these three Hebrew men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they just say no.
They refuse.
They refuse. They engage in direct civil disobedience because a higher moral law is at stake. They won't violate their conscience, even under penalty of death.
And the consequence wasn't just a night in jail.
No, it was the fiery furnace. Literal execution. King uses this to anchor the entire civil rights movement in this deep Judeo-Christian tradition. He's telling these white clergymen, what you call troublemaking, the Bible calls faithfulness.
He's saying, I'm not doing anything new here, I'm just doing what they did.
Yes, and he points to the early Christians too. They faced hungry lions and chopping blocks rather than submit to the unjust laws of the Roman Empire.
Okay, here's the part that gets really interesting for me. This feels like a paradox. King argues that what he's doing is actually showing the highest respect for the law. How does that work?
It does sound like a contradiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I respect the law, so I'm going to break it.
Right.
But he sets very specific conditions. He says anyone who breaks an unjust law must do it openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty.
Openly and lovingly. That's not how people usually break laws. You don't rob a bank lovingly.
Exactly. The criminal wants to evade the law. The civil disobedient accepts the penalty to make a point.
So by walking into that jail cell,
he's turning his own body into a mirror. He's trying to arouse the conscience of the community by suffering. He's saying, I respect the idea of law so much that I will accept its punishment just to show all of you how broken this specific statute is.
That is such a critical distinction. He's not an anarchist trying to tear the system down.
Not at all. He's trying to redeem it. He wants to make the courthouse just.
But that creates a logical problem, which he sees coming. How do you decide what stops me from just breaking tax laws because they annoy me? How do you tell the difference between a just law and an unjust one?
And that's the intellectual heavy lifting of the letter. He knows he can't just go on feelings. So he brings in the theological heavyweights. He starts with St. Augustine.
An unjust law is no law at all.
Right. But that's still a bit abstract. So he pulls in St. Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas said a just law is rooted in eternal and natural law.
Okay, still a little philosophical.
It is. So King makes it more concrete. He creates what I call a personality test for a law.
A personality test, like for legislation.
Sort of. He argues that any law that uplifts human personality is just. And any law that degrades human personality is unjust.
And segregation, by its very nature.
Degrades human personality, distorts the soul. He even brings in the theologian Paul Tillich, who defines sin as separation.
Ah, okay.
King says segregation is the ultimate expression of man's tragic separation. It gives the segregated a false sense of inferiority.
Which makes total sense. It crushes the spirit.
But, and this is so important, he says it also damages the segregator. It gives the white man a false sense of superiority. It distorts their reality, too.
He brings in the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber here as well, right?
Yes, with the idea of the I-thou versus the I-it relationship.
Let's break that down because it sounds a little academic.
It's actually very simple. An I-thou relationship is person to person. I see you as a full human being. An I-it relationship is person to object. I see a chair as something to be used.
And segregation turns people into objects.
It relegates them to the status of things. It turns an I-thou relationship into an I-it. That's why it's not just politically wrong. It's like a violation of being human itself.
That's deep, especially for a letter written on newspaper scraps. But he also gives a very concrete political test, doesn't he?
He does. And it's brilliant. He defines an unjust law as a code that a majority power group makes a minority obey.
But doesn't make binding on itself.
Yes. Difference made legal.
And a just law
is a code that the majority compels a minority to follow and that it is willing to follow itself. sameness made legal.
That just cuts right through all the hypocrisy. If you're not willing to live by the law you wrote, then the law has no legitimacy.
It exposes the double standard right away. It's an airtight argument.
So he's dismantled the outsider label, he's justified breaking the law with the Hebrew prophets, and he's given us a clear test for what makes a law unjust. But the clergyman had one more label for him, one that was meant to be the final disqualifying blow.
They called him an extremist.
Which was, and still is, a very dirty word. It means you're irrational, you're dangerous, you're on the fringe.
It was meant to completely marginalize him. To say, this man is not a reasonable person.
So how does he handle that? Does he say, no, I'm actually very moderate?
Well, at first he says he was disappointed by it, but then he does this classic king rhetorical pivot. He just leans in and embraces it.
The roll call of extremists?
Exactly. He starts asking questions. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Quoting, let justice roll down like waters.
Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel?
He just keeps going.
Yeah.
He realizes that being an extremist isn't the problem. The problem is what you're extreme about.
He reframes the whole question.
He says the question isn't whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Are we going to be extremists for hate or for love, for injustice or for justice?
He basically turns it back on them and says, you're accusing me of being like Jesus? Thank you.
It completely disarms the insult. He takes their weapon and makes it his own, and it forces them to look in the mirror. If they aren't extremists for justice, then what are they being moderate about?
So let's connect this to the bigger picture. We've been deep in the letter, but the sources also link this to King's whole style, specifically the Exodus narrative.
Yeah, you really can't separate the letter from the broader story he was telling. He constantly saw the civil rights struggle through the lens of the Israelites leaving Egypt.
The Exodus story.
Yes. For King, Egypt wasn't just a place. It was symbolic of slavery and Jim Crow. Pharaoh wasn't just an ancient king. He was the oppressive status quo. He was Bull Connor.
And the Red Sea was the struggle itself.
The dangerous, turbulent crossing you had to make to get to the Promised Land.
And I know our sources mention his final speech, I've been to the mountaintop. How does that connect here?
Well, in that speech, he talks about how Pharaoh kept the slaves in bondage. He says Pharaoh's favorite trick was keeping them fighting among themselves. So for King, unity was the first step out of slavery. But there's an even deeper theological point. It's sometimes called soteriology.
Soteriology, okay, that's a big word.
It's a doctrine of salvation. But King had this idea of setting the captors free.
Wait, setting the captors free?
Yes, this is a point that often gets missed. He believed segregation harmed the white oppressor just as much as it did the black oppressed.
We touched on that with the false sense of superiority.
Right. But think about what that means. King was willing to suffer, to go to jail and face the dogs, not just to free his own people, but to free his white Christian brothers from what he called the paralyzing chains of conformity.
So he saw his own suffering as a way to save the people who were hurting him.
That is the absolute core of his nonviolent theology. It's redemptive suffering. He believed that by absorbing their violence, he could break the cycle and, in a way, save their souls. It flips the whole power dynamic. The man in the jail cell becomes the priest. The man with the keys is the one who really needs saving.
It all comes back to that idea of mutuality. If we're all connected, then your spiritual sickness is my sickness too.
Precisely. And that's why the letter is more than a legal defense. It's a pastoral letter. He's preaching to these clergymen, trying to save them from their own silence.
So we've gone from the margins of a newspaper through a fiery furnace all the way to the mountaintop. It's amazing to think this all came from a moment of total despair and solitary.
It really is. It shows that clarity can come from the darkest places. King used these Bible stories not as fluff, but as legal and moral precedent. He believed civil disobedience as a cosmic companionship.
Cosmic companionship. I like that. The universe is on your side.
Basically, when you stand up for justice, you aren't standing alone. You're standing with the moral arc of history.
You know, as we wrap up, there's one challenge in the letter that always sticks with me. It's probably the most uncomfortable part of the text. King said he was more disappointed with the white moderate who preferred order over justice than he was with the actual KKK.
It's a haunting thought.
Yeah.
Because the guy burning a cross, at least you knew where he stood. The biggest stumbling block was the person who said, I agree with your goal, but I just can't agree with your methods.
The person who says, just wait, now's not the right time.
Exactly. The person who prefers a negative peace, which is just the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice.
And I think the provocative thought for us, for the listener, is this. Where do we see that today? It's so easy to look back at 1963 and judge, but where do we value order over justice right now?
Where are we the white moderates in our own time? That's a question that really requires some thought.
It does. Sometimes to find the truth, you have to read between the margins.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.